Yes, I'll switch if I need to. Just let me know.
Okay, all right. All right, I think we're up and running. Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Weathers here at Your Vitality Project, and I'm really happy to welcome my dear friend and our regular guest here, Douglas Prater. Wonderful to see you, Doug.
Hi, Dr. Bob. Good to see you too. Thank you.
Yeah, good to have you. Our topic is timely, and it's a continuation, Doug, of a conversation that I began last week with Angela McLeod, who you and I both know, and who's been also a dear friend and contributor to all things here at the Vitality Project. And so we're looking at managing stress during the holidays. And since this touches virtually every single one of us, I thought it'd be worth talking about. And I'd like to see where you and I go, just because I know it will be unique to our conversation. So any thoughts that you have to kind of kick it off, Doug, and we can take it from there. I'll preamble it with this. I've come out of a day of running groups at treatment centers, and this has been the theme of the day. Literally every single group is dealing with family stressors, either being with family or being separated from family, particularly in and around the hopes and the projections that get activated during holiday time. So it's an unusual time that way, and I'm eager to hear from you. So let's see what your thoughts are to begin with.
Well, can be a really difficult time for most of us. Like you mentioned, the hopes and projections and all sorts of things that come up, loss and loneliness for a lot of people, and a lot of potential triggers too. I think that one of the most important things we can do is to have a good place to hide the bodies when visiting family over. Really,
oh, that's great. That's true. I've got to say this only because no one will know this. And Doug, you know that I'm about as ignorant of contemporary television as anybody. But for anybody who doesn't know this, Doug was acted in The Walking Dead. Am I getting even the name of the series right? I'm embarrassed to tell you. Yep. And I saw an episode in which Doug was in that. So when he talks about burying the dead, you better take that stuff seriously, y'all.
Yep. No, really, it can be really hard to visit family. I know I've had the opportunity in my sobriety to make some really good reparations with my parents, who were profoundly affected by my time in active addiction, but it's still difficult sometimes. They certainly remember the person that I was, and I remember the person that I was. There's a lot that can come up in those visits, which isn't always comfortable to deal with. It's a time too when we're off of our regular schedules, and all the self-care practices that are normally so important to our recovery become difficult to do a lot of times when our schedules are disrupted. And it's important to plan ahead and find in advance times when we're going to make things work, and to have also those techniques that we keep in our back pocket for things that come up in the moment, knowing how to navigate difficult situations as they come.
Yeah, I'm writing a little note here, Doug, and I know this is going to seem like a broken record. I'm putting your name in here, and I'm wanting to recommend as a resource our collaboration. It's just timely. It's a CD of meditations with music. Doug's created meditative soundtracks, and we've talked about ways of skillful means for forgiving others, asking for forgiveness, and maybe most critically, forgiving ourselves. It just came up for me, Doug, as I was listening to you, that we come together, and speaking of skeletons in the closet, all of the disappointments and frustrations, as well as joy, all of that's there, and it really gets activated around holiday get-togethers. And if we can have some kind of tools at our disposal to navigate these times, we can actually not only survive it, but possibly even repair relationships and possibly strengthen our ties to one another. But it takes skillful means, and I just want to recommend it. I just put the link there. Y'all can look this up online. Doug and I did this CD. It's available online through iAwake Technologies, and Doug and I just talked about this the last time we got together, but it seems really apropos of this conversation as well.
It's the meditations we did together are absolutely perfect to use in a time like this. I know that there's a lot that I needed to ask for forgiveness for, and working with that allowed me to do it, and to forgive myself too for a lot of the hurt that I caused to people who I will be seeing this holiday season. Socially distanced this time, of course, but nonetheless, I find too that this is a really good time to really practice our empathy and learning to take the role of other. There are some people that we're just not ever going to see eye to eye with, but taking the time in those difficult conversations to take perspective and see through their eyes and try to understand as best we can where a person is coming from can help make it easier and really strengthen whatever bond is there, or at least allow us to pass peaceably through the time.
Yeah. Also writing a note right here as I'm listening to you, Doug. And we've made reference here before at your Vitality Project about the work of the Jewish philosopher and theologian Martin Buber, who has a book with this title, I and Thou, and he coined these terms. And it comes up for me as I listen to you, Doug, that he contrasts two ways of relating. And let's just apply this to going home or getting together with family or friends for the holidays. One way that we can relate to others is to keep them at arm's length and to think of what you just said around empathy. The opposite of that might be judgment, where I just judge somebody kind of at arm's length and I don't allow them in, nor allow myself into their frame of reference, which is what you're suggesting here. And Martin Buber referred to that as an I-it relationship. I just posted it, an I-it. I treat you as an it. You're just an object. I don't enter into any kind of subjective connection, much less communion with you. But he contrasts that with that first term I put up there. He contrasts that with an I-thou relationship. And if I treat you as a thou, then I treat you as worthy of respect, certainly worthy of empathy. And can I join you in compassion, even if we don't agree? Can I remember your thou-ness, whether we're on the same page, whether we agree, whether it's politically, religiously, or otherwise? Is there a way to find that connection? Is there a way to drop down to the level in which we're all connected? Easier said than done, but I think it's a worthwhile aspiration. And if not you or me, then who is going to do this? It's like, can somebody step up to the plate and extend the right hand to fellowship? And I really like that distinction, I, thou. Every one of us knows this. You don't have to know philosophy. You don't have to have heard of Martin Buber to know what it's like to have somebody look at you, and they look at you with eyes of kindness, of compassion, of concern, of curiosity. And what that feels like to be on the receiving end of that. What a tremendous gift to give at the time of Hanukkah or Christmas or New Year's. What a tremendous gift to give to loved ones is that gift of compassion.
Well, and especially with the people for whom so many of our relationships are potentially fraught, people who have been hurt by our addictions and damaged in that way, people that we may have wronged or who may have profoundly wronged us, to be the first to extend that compassion, that thou-ness, that sense of engaging with someone who deserves that respect and compassion as an equal is a gesture that can really start profound healing when relationships need it. Also one of the most difficult times to do it, but Doug, you and I have talked about her before, but she's had such an influence in contemporary psychotherapy. She's been a particularly strong influence on my wife, Colleen, in Colleen's work with couples. But Sue Johnson's writings, particularly in her popular books, the one that comes to mind, and you and I have actually talked about this book before, Hold Me Tight. Sue does something incredible in that book. Sue's a clinical psychologist and researcher from Canada. She lives in Ottawa. And she's done more research on couples than, well, there's only one other person that's done as much research as her, and that's John Gottman up at University of Washington. They've done more than anybody. And Sue has the best treatment in that book that I've ever read of
how to make an apology, you
Mhm.
know. And it comes up for me as I listen to you right now, is that I like it. She talks about apologies that we all know because we've all done them and been on the receiving end, and they're grossly ineffective. She talks about like the drive-by apology, just like whoop, like this, or kind of the obligatory apology, like with gun to head. She has a whole list of apologies that don't work, but she talks about apology. I don't have it at the tip of my finger on my fingertips right now, but there's like 6 or 7 aspects to making an apology really robust. I want to recommend to anybody who's watching us, you can find, if you did a Google search for Sue Johnson on apology out of her book, Hold Me Tight, my guess is you'd find people that have written articles about it. And if you don't find anything, then buy her book. You can get it. You can get it in electronic form for probably less than $10. It's a great investment, and just that chapter on apologies is worth gold. I've taught it in the distant past to clients that I see who are in treatment, who are in recovery, and they're all facing the prospect of having to make huge amends. Yeah. Many of them are involved in 12-step programs where making amends is part and parcel of the 8th and 9th out of 12 steps. And they go to me, how the heck do I do that, Dr. Bob? And I said, well, let's start with Sue Johnson, a way to break down an apology. And it really starts, Doug, with what you were suggesting earlier. It starts with empathy. It starts with empathy for the other person's experience. And you could do a lot worse than starting with that kind of emptying yourself of yourself and just being with the other person's suffering, their fear, their judgment, their horror, all of that, and then joining at that level. And I highly recommend, if you're interested in making amends during the holidays or apologizing, I recommend that as the best resource I've ever read.
Yeah, would definitely have to agree. And want to mention too, one of the potential stumbling blocks, a really fine line can be had here of falling into the trap of self-blame and self-judgment. When we can really begin to empathize with others we've hurt, we can, or at least I have a tendency to really start blaming and judging myself. And it can be difficult and just incredibly important to remember to extend that same compassion to ourselves and know that we are in a process of growth, continuing to make our living amends by doing the best we can in each and every moment and not repeating those mistakes. Another part of the apology, but an earnest commitment to ourselves to live better moving forward.
Yeah. Doug, you and I have talked about this personally as well as here. It's a finer tuned aspect of what you and I did together in our Freedom of Forgiveness CD project. But it continues to roll out for me in terms of my own internal work in my quiet time every day, and certainly has impacted the clinical work I do in and around addiction recovery. But as we've talked about in the forgiveness, there's asking others for forgiveness, and there's offering forgiveness to others, and there's forgiving ourselves. And what I've noticed more recently, it's forgiving parts of myself. It's almost like one part of myself forgiving another part of myself. And it sounds kind of crazy at first glance, but it's not that at all crazy at all when you just drop down into it. Is that can I apologize to parts of myself? I'm going to speak specifically to addiction. There are parts of myself, huge parts of myself, that were neglected or overridden in active addiction, and they deserve loving, they deserve healing, and they deserve apology. And so it's offering apology to them. It's also, even in the apologizing, which is implied in what you're saying, it's offering compassion to oneself for having done that. I did it this morning when I was swimming this morning in my early morning watery meditation. I was doing this same work. This particular conversation was between me and God. But it was asking for forgiveness. And in that forgiveness, it was like forgiveness for parts of myself in and around addiction that it's obvious at the grossest level that they haven't served me. But addiction rarely arises from a vacuum. Right. The addiction most often arises as a function of trauma that's just not been healed. And at some point we move towards self-medication. It's a crappy answer to it, but it's a very understandable and very common one. And so this morning it's like being with God, asking for forgiveness from God, and also asking for God to help me forgive myself for the limitations that led to my vulnerability, in which I got so far off the path. It's like all of that wound together. So it's kind of layer upon layer, but it really does imply self-compassion or self-forgiveness. Doug, I just led a group this afternoon right before we met, and I went around the group and I asked, this is hot off the press, just asked in the group, and I said, I want each one of you to identify. It's the first time I've met any of these individuals. I'm kind of pinch hitting in this group this week.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I want each one of you to think of, what do you see right now, no matter how early you are in your recovery, and all of them are by definition are early. I said, what do you see as your single greatest obstacle to sustaining what you're getting here in treatment, to keeping this going? And we got all the way around the group, and the second to the last individual, he used a term that I've never heard anybody share in this setting. He said, my single greatest obstacle, Dr. Bob, is self-love. That was exactly the term he used, self-love. He was talking exactly what we're talking about. And we went way deep in that, both segments of this group, before and after break. Self-love, self-compassion, self-forgiveness. Yeah.
I went to treatment for the first time a number of years before I managed to actually get sober. I relapsed a little bit, but during that treatment, one of the most important exercises we did, and one of the most difficult things, was to write a letter of self-forgiveness. And it was really hard for me to lean into that. You were talking about parts of yourself forgiving and other parts of yourself, and I wanted to bring into this one of the most interesting, most helpful books I read in recent years was on internal family systems. It's Richard Schwartz, called You Are the One You've Been Waiting For. And it talks all about how to do parts work and work with these different parts of yourself. It was an incredible tool in helping me work with different aspects of myself. And I highly recommend that too, to anybody who resonates with what we're talking about now.
I'm going to write this down. I know Richard Schwartz's work from reading his technical stuff, and I don't know the name of this book. Richard Schwartz, what's the title one more time, Doug? I want to write down.
You Are the One You've Been Waiting For.
I just love that title.
Mm-hmm.
You. And he's been a pioneer in what he refers to as internal family systems, doing work with the different parts of ourselves. Thank you for reminding me of him. It's wonderful. There's that resource for our readers. Spencer is watching us tonight, and he made references. We were talking about forgiveness. There's a new documentary that's come out that was just completed, and it addresses self-forgiveness in some depth. I got to be a part of this documentary, and so I know because I spoke into this, but others did too. And we have people from around the country who care a lot about this topic. And I put a link to that, or the name of it here. It's just called Lessons in Forgiveness, and it's available on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube. So there's a lot of resources between Richard Schwartz, Sue Johnson, this documentary, Doug's, and my CD that we did on forgiveness. All of these, I didn't know we would go here tonight, but it's so apt. You know, one of the things that I shared, in fact, we talked about it in the group today, if the number one trigger for relapse to addictive behaviors is stress, and psychological research has proven that again and again, then you begin to ask, okay, what's stressful? Well, people get stressed by different things. Typically, when I ask in groups, relationship stressors are the number one. Number two, neck and neck oftentimes are financial, job related, because that's our survival in the world. And then I just throw this in there. Thirdly, what comes up a lot, I've done a lot of these over the years of these groups, is boredom. Boredom is that having a lack of ways of expressing myself creatively leads to boredom. And so anyway, that's that piece. But if we dig a little bit deeper into this business of stress, I'll ask, in fact, I did today, I asked in the group, psychology measures how stressful emotions are. Does anybody know how psychology does that? And there was a guy in the group that said this. He said, yeah, they measure the adrenaline and cortisol levels. And I went, wow, that's true. That's exactly right. Yeah. And so I said, for example, if I'm angry and you ask me, Bob, are you stressed? I might say no to you. And I could either be lying to you, which is possible, or not know, which is also possible. But if you measure my cortisol and I'm angry, it will be elevated, and my cortisol doesn't lie. So I asked the group, I said, do you guys have any idea what is the most stressful negative human emotion? And we talked about anger, we talked about fear, we talked about sadness, but we ended up talking about the topic you and I are touching around tonight, Douglas, and it's shame.
Yeah.
It's shame. Shame is the most stressful human emotion. It kicks up the highest elevations or spikes in adrenaline and cortisol. And if we had more time, I'd talk about why that's the case. I won't right now. You can just take my word for it. But the bottom line is that shame is the opposite of self-compassion. Shame is where I judge myself, cannot forgive myself, that I see myself as broken and defective. Then its antidote, its solution is empathy for oneself. It's ability to forgive oneself, self-compassion. And then if we do the math on this, it might be the greatest gift I could give to myself would be to develop skillful means for learning how to forgive myself, insofar as stress is the #1 trigger for relapse. Mm-hmm. Shame is the most stressful human emotion. Let's cut right to the chase.
Yeah.
Spencer reached out and said, shame. Spencer, thank you. Spencer was a good student, and I appreciate it. He also reiterated the name of the documentary series, Lessons in Forgiveness. And so, the crazy thing about what we're talking about, Doug, is if you ask most people, and I've done clinical work for 40 years, mm-hmm. It's very rare that you'll have a client come in saying, I want to work on my shame.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It does happen, but it's very unusual. In fact, if you ask most people if they struggle with shame, they'll say no. And I don't think that they're lying. I think some people might be. I don't think that most people are lying. I think that most of us are ashamed of being ashamed.
Yeah.
And so, and we're unconscious of it. So it stays on the periphery.
We can recognize it. Sure.
Yeah. And so it's almost like addiction becomes an indirect indicator of shame for many people. I can certainly raise my hand with that. And so it's like even getting the conversation to move in the direction of, what do you mean I'm ashamed? You have to find different ways, skillful ways to kind of unpack this phenomenon of shame. And I think one way is to talk about it in terms of forgiveness. Yeah. Do you forgive yourself for your foul ups, particularly in the context of addiction? And most people don't. Most people don't. And now we're in the province of shame. So now we can talk about what do we do about that?
Yeah. It's a tricky one and difficult one for sure. I know it's been one of the biggest challenges for me and one of the most healing avenues to explore as well. Once I realized and was able to admit to myself and begin to address that problem, it really made a big difference. Bob, before we sign off tonight, while we still have a few minutes, I want to make sure that we hit one other really important thing having to do with stress at the holidays. And this is not in meeting with other people and dealing with other people, but the opposite of that, especially during COVID. But that is grief and loneliness.
Yeah, thank you.
That can really come up during the holidays for people who have been through addiction or some of the relationships that we won't have a chance to repair.
Mm-hmm. There was another man in today's group, as I mentioned, it was the first time I met him, and he said his biggest obstacle is isolation.
Yeah,
isolation. That's it. During COVID, he says he's lost his marriage owing to addiction, and he's able to work alone. And he said, I isolate. He says there's no accountability. And so I used to start drinking at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and now I start at 5 o'clock in the morning. And that's what led him to come into treatment. Thank goodness for that. It may save his life. But it's isolation. And then you throw in grief on top of that, being alone with dark, heavy, stressful feelings such as sadness, sorrow, grief. Do you have thoughts about that, Doug, in terms of possible avenues to resource?
Well, that's a really difficult one, too. I think that's one of the cases where, number one, it's important to have our support lined up, people that we can talk to, people that we can call, whether it's a friend or anyone close to us, or knowing where there's a group online that we can connect with, or a meeting in person, or having something ready for when those moments hit. Those are also the times when, for me personally, at least, the fastest way to get myself out of that and change my state has been through movement, through physical exercise. And it's something that can be really unmotivated to do when you're feeling really down and triggered and grieving and lonely, but it is the most effective thing I know for shifting state.
Yeah. I'm writing a note here. I'm sending it out. We had a conversation today about how it is that we all share brains. Is that obviously I asked individuals in one of the groups, where are our brains located? Somebody finally yelled out, our skulls. And I said, bingo, that's accurate. And I said, with brain scan technology, thankfully, in the last 20 to 30 years, we're able to measure how much we impact each other in terms of our brain states. And so my being with you, Doug, is psychoactive in the best of ways, which I'm happy to say, is that we affect each other. And so one of the things is can we be with other people? The technical term for this in psychology is co-regulate. We co-regulate one another. But your point or your question is, what do I do if I'm alone? What do I do if I'm isolated? And then you bring up the flip side of the coin, which is self-regulation. What can I do to regulate myself even when I'm alone? And you talked about physical exercise. It's a hugely important piece. You and I are both really committed to mindfulness or meditation practice, prayer, devotional study, quiet time, being in nature, hobbies that we have that we're both musicians, composing and creating music. Other people cook and dance and garden. It's like, what can we do to resource what is available to us, even if we're alone, so that maybe we move isolation into solitude, but it's not loneliness, it's solitude. It's being alone. That's a very different quality to it. Yeah. Spencer writes here, volunteering at a soup kitchen or another event during the holidays. That's wonderful, Spencer. I just talked to somebody today who's going to be working with homeless a homeless population when he moves home. It's a new job for him, and he's very concerned about maintaining sobriety. And I cited the research that came out of Harvard University recently. They were looking at what makes 12-step groups effective. And since it's a graduate school in psychology, they weren't going to look at the higher power concept. They'd leave that to the theologians. And what they found was altruism, which is volunteering at a soup kitchen or another event, Spencer, is that when we can pay it forward and give to others, you could really ask the honest question, who's really the beneficiary? Because it's in the giving that we get so much. And so this individual today who's going home, he's leaving treatment, he's going home to he's going to be working in an environment where he helps people. That may be the very best thing for him. And so, yes, thank you for that. Are being able to reach out to help somebody who's in need, maybe the greatest gift we can give them and ourselves.
It really ties directly in with shame too, especially as it relates to worthlessness. The surest way out of worthlessness is to help somebody else. When I can offer something valuable to someone else.
Yeah, I've shared it here before, but it comes to mind, Doug. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, he says, he who has a why to live for can deal with virtually any how. So if we apply that to recovery, the how of recovery, what do I need to do to recover, might well take care of itself if I can find a why. A why am I doing this? Well, I'm doing this to be able to give back, to give to others, whether it's family or volunteering to the homeless or any other situation, is that having a Viktor Frankl, wrote about this in Man's Search for Meaning. In fact, that's where he quoted Friedrich Nietzsche. He found this even in the most extreme of human circumstances, in the death camps of Auschwitz and Buchenwald during the Holocaust. The people that seemed to survive were those that found in the most strained of circumstances some reason for remaining ethical, for giving to another person. It's very touching. Highly recommend that book. It's one of the best-selling books of the 20th century, and you can read it in a night. I know that because I did. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Frankl. But you can apply that to recovery. is that how do we find meaning and purpose and value in our lives? And if I'm alone, what can I do to, even amidst that, to find meaning and then to allow that to be my North Star?
Mhm.
Doug, we need to wind down for the sake of time right now. I'd like to keep going all night with you. Honestly, appreciate so much all that you've shared. I'm hoping that others find value in this, and it'll be archived, and so others can follow up on this. If you want to contact Doug, you can contact him through your Vitality Project, and I'll get through to Doug. Doug, I really appreciate not only the words of wisdom, but your spirit. It comes through loudly. There's a blessing in South Africa amongst the Kalahari Bushmen. They're very short, and they say to each other, I'll tell you why that's meaningful. They say to each other when they see each other in the distance, they say, "Your spirit looms large on the horizon."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It does, Douglas. My dear Kalahari Bushman brother.
Likewise,
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, it's great to see you. I wish you a good evening, Doug. Thanks for joining us tonight. Blessings to all. Take good care, everybody.
Good night.
All right. Good night. Bye-bye.